Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm going to be talking about the 5th album from Deadmau5, 4 times 4 equals 12. Alright, so you know how Random Album Title was the album that got Deadmau5 big, right? Well, this album pushed him over the top. It's his most popular from what I can see, although iTunes is no longer a reliable source as it only has a version with a missing track and no continuous mix anymore. But it seems most people tend to pick this one as their favorite album from the guy. I even saw a comment that said it was their favorite album, period. Favorite album ever, huh? Oh dear. Alright, I'll just be blunt with you and get to the point quickly. This album is definitely my least favorite from the guy since he became popular. Just because it's not one of my favorites doesn't mean it's bad, there's still plenty of things I like about it. But here's the thing. I feel like with this album, Deadmau5 was just following the popular trends at the time. In 2010, the cool thing was dubstep, and Skrillex was taking the world by storm with his Scary Monsters and Ice Sprites EP. So it was only fitting that Deadmau5 made his darkest and most bombastic album to date that year. Sure, he was still following his own style most of the time, but there were 2 songs with straight dubstep, and even the majority of the album had really understated or non-existent or atonal melodies. The kids didn't want beautiful melodies like on Random Album Title anymore, they just wanted something loud. So Deadmau5 gave them just that. And it does work very well in that respect. It is a good album to just headbang to. Trouble is, the guy's melodies are usually his biggest strength. So having a full album in which melody was more or less just kind of thrown to the side was kind of a disappointment. I will give him credit in that, once again, the continuous mix was excellent, and even better mixed than For Lack of a Better Name. But at the same time, I almost kind of get the feeling that maybe Deadmau5 may have specifically made some tracks to make smoother transitions rather than be enjoyable on their own merits, and, well, I'm getting sidetracked. I'll just go down track by track. The album actually does start really strongly with Some Chords, which has a very simple but catchy melody, and a very satisfying and also pretty catchy drop. No complaints here. Next it flows into Sofi Needs a Ladder, or Sofi Needs a Ladder? I'm gonna go with Sofi, which features the female rapper Sofi yelling all over it, not unlike Skrillex and Sarah on songs like Kyoto or Weekends! The song has a very satisfying and intense beat, but not much of a melody. Next up is A City in Florida, which honestly feels like it was made specifically to make a smoother transition in between the 2 surrounding tracks. The song's melody starts out sounding exactly like the overblown bass line on Sofi Needs a Ladder, but gets a bit more fleshed out and gets some more high-pitched synths added on top, but the same beat. The song just feels like one big, huge build-up, just eventually dropping into Bad Selection. Now, when I first heard Bad Selection, I absolutely hated it. The melody was way too atonal, but not in an interesting way. Not to mention, it felt like it went on too long without enough progression. And while I do still hold that the song doesn't progress much over the course of its running time, there is something oddly catchy about it that I can't really put my finger on. So, you know, I'm okay with it now, but not one of my favorites. And once again, the bass line has the exact same preset as the previous 2 tracks. Things finally start to get a bit more interesting as we get into Animal Rights, which actually has a melody, and a pretty decent one at that, carried by some weird, funky, plucky clavinet-ish synth. The song also has its share of subtle dubstep wubs here and there. Then we move on to I Said, which isn't quite as catchy, but makes things slightly more interesting by using the sometimes things get whatever formula again. The melody for the majority of the song, especially during the beat-driven sections, really only has one repeating note that occasionally gets covered in reverb and engulfs the entire song, eventually making the transition into Cthulhu Sleeps. Now, Cthulhu Sleeps, I feel like I shouldn't like as much as I actually do. The beat is not much different from the other songs leading up to it, aside from the noises all over the place. Heck, it's probably even less intense than some of the other beats on here. But I really like this song for a few reasons. For one thing, the beatless sections. Yeah, this is another sometimes things get whatever clone surprise. The beatless sections have some really great melodies, albeit much darker than the usual from the guy. And another thing I like about the song is that it just barely breaks the 10-minute barrier. This might be a problem for other songs, but here it's a good thing because A, as repetitive as it is, it's got enough interesting things going on to justify its length, and B, it really makes the song stand out among the track listing, like it's the giant epic centerpiece of the album. And even though it's not even the most intense song on here, it is indeed the most epic. Anyway, then we move on to Right This Second, which I'm kind of on the fence over. On one hand, this song is kind of like FML in that it's got the bouncier 6 on the floor beat, and it's even a little more melody driven than that song was. But there's two small problems I have with it, directly stemming from that comparison. First, I get the feeling that FML actually would have been a better fit for this album, being much darker and more intense. And second of all, I don't love the melody on the song. You know what, at least it's good for some much needed variety, but FML was better and this one just kinda sticks out. Speaking of things sticking out, next is Raise Your Weapon. On one hand, this song really doesn't fit in the track listing very well, but it is probably the single most interesting song on the album. So this song's an obvious two-parter, with the first half more or less sounding like I Remember crossed with the Faxing Berlin intro, and the second half being a really intense, extended dubstep breakdown courtesy of none other than Skrillex himself, because of course it is. In the context of the album, really only the second half fits in any way, being extremely dark, intense, and, you know, shameless fan pandering. But yeah, as you might guess, I think the first half of Raise Your Weapon is way better than the second half. It may make no sense on a collection of dark, 4-on-the-floor pounders, and might have fit better among random album titles lineup, but bloody hell, I love this song. And Skrillex's section may be very typical of him, but I like the second half a lot too. For one thing, let's not forget that in 2010, Skrillex was at the top of his game, and this section of the song is one of the best things he's ever done. The only thing tying the two halves together is the vocals from the non-Haley Gibby, whose actual name I don't feel like pronouncing right now. Obviously, they're a great fit for Deadmau5's section of the song, though things get kinda dicey on Skrillex's half. First of all, just on paper, airy Haley Gibby-esque vocals on top of intense Skrillex dubstep. Does that sound good to you? Cause it doesn't sound good to me on paper. And yes, it does absolutely sound kinda awkward and forced, but not to such an extent that it takes away from the song. Honestly, that's kind of a miracle in and of itself. Either way, Raise Your Weapon may stick out like a sore thumb on this album, but it's also far and away my favorite track off of here, so whatever. I kind of feel like the album could just ended at Raise Your Weapon and it would have been better off, but unfortunately it keeps going, and ends in a less than ceremonious fashion. One Trick Pony is Deadmau5 actually trying to do Skrillex-style dubstep himself, while adding Sofi's rapping on top again, and though it fits the album, sort of, it's just kind of a buzzkill after Raise Your Weapon. Or still, he follows that buzzkill with an even bigger buzzkill in Everything Before. This song just barely fits on the album, in that it does have a dark atmosphere, and is the same tempo as the songs at the beginning of the album, but it's way too weak and sluggish to work. In addition to being placed after 3 songs in a row that intentionally broke the mold. The melody isn't his worst, there are worse melodies on this exact album. See A City in Florida and Bad Selection. But out of all the tracks to end on, this was by far the least effective ending he could have picked. Again, not a bad song, but placing it at the end just makes my enjoyment take a nosedive. So, overall, I'm kinda torn on this album, as there are a lot of things that really bug the crap out of me. I think this isn't really the side of Deadmau5 I tend to enjoy seeing, and if it were not for songs like Raise Your Weapon, I don't think I'd find much of a reason to come back to it at all. But at the same time, I think when you balance everything out, then there are more things that I like about it than things I dislike about it. I get why so many people enjoy this album so much, and why people often pick it as their favorite from the guy, but for me, I just get this weird feeling like he was just kinda pandering towards the trends of the time. And this is especially disappointing for me, as I think he didn't need to do this. Deadmau5 isn't like any of the other big popular EDM names around. He's got a unique enough sound that he doesn't need to follow popular trends, he just needs to be himself. I feel like he just kind of forced himself to do this. But that being said, there are still plenty of good songs off of here that I do really like a lot. I just never consider this album as a whole to be a classic by any stretch. He's done better. Overall, I was going to give this a 6.7 at first, but having listened to this several times, yeah, that's a little low. I'm gonna go solid 7. Favorite tracks, Some Chords, Sofi Needs a Ladder, Animal Rights, Cthulhu Sleeps, Right This Second, and Raise Your Weapon. Least favorite track, Everything Before. But, of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but leave your opinion in the comments, or if you have any requests for me to cover, tell me about those as well. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.